Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 10 of Concepts with Kalantar. This week, my guest is Eve Blake, and we're talking about the concepts of obsession and fangirls. Welcome to the show, Eve.
Thank you very much for having me.
For those of you who do not know, Eve is an amazing young lady. She talked at TED this year where she talked about the concept of fangirls. She talked about the concept of obsession and kind of how, as a society, we've sort of misunderstood what it means to be a fangirl. She is a if you haven't heard of her yet, you will within the next few months because she is going to be blowing up all over the place. She is
Sounds wonderful.
she's producing a amazing stage musical. There's some talks of some Netflix and other types of adaptations potentially. We don't know, but it's going to be amazing. It's going to blow your mind. It's a new type of musical, if I understand it correctly. So let's get Eve. Hi, Eve.
Hi.
So tell us, how did you first learn about fangirls and sort of that world?
Well, it was completely by accident, and I've told this story many times, but I never get tired of it. So 4 years ago, I met a 13-year-old girl, and she was a friend's little cousin, and she very casually told me that she had met the man she was going to marry. I was like, okay, sure you have. Tell me about him. And she told me that his name was Harry Styles. And if you don't know who that is, at the time he was like one of the heartthrobs of the world's biggest boy band, One Direction. So I'm like, okay, sure. And she's like, look, I know you don't think I'm serious, but I actually am, and I'm going to be with him, and I'm going to show you, because I love him so much that I would slit someone's throat to be with him.
That would have been a really intense thing to hear.
Yeah, it was a moment. I was like, I was overwhelmed by the violence, but I was also kind of impressed and intrigued by her fervor and her passion and her determination. I don't like a moth to a flame. I was like, I need to know more about this. And also, like, I'm a writer. I'm a playwright, and I also write stuff for screen, and so I'm just inherently an eavesdropper and like a sticky beak. So I was like, I need to know more, and I became obsessed with researching teenage fangirls.
Well, I mean, we talked about this. You talked about it very briefly in your TED talk, but I really want to kind of hammer in on this idea and this sort of concept around how you did that research. Because I mean, I wouldn't know where the first place to start is. How does one learn about fangirls?
Google.
Of course, Dr. Google.
Well, okay. To be more specific, though, this was early 2015, and so the One Direction fandom was alive and well, and that's where I started.
Yep.
And the two big locales that I could find were Tumblr and Twitter. So it started by just like infinitely scrolling hashtags like Harry Styles, and then discovering hashtags off the back of that, and beginning to. I was very fascinated with like. The lexicon.
Specific though, this was early 2015.
Sorry, that's your lovely voice, but I don't know why it's kicking on in this one. Let me just give. How good is that film? Can I just say that it's not underrated, and I'm not going to allow anyone to talk ill of Gremlins.
I was very fascinated with like the lexicon.
Oh, I thought I've misunderstood. I thought underrated was overrated.
Are you the lawyer?
Yeah. I appear for the defender. Yeah. No. Yeah. Look, we'll come back to Gremlins because I can talk about it for hours.
We can't leave it undiscussed.
And you don't feed the Gremlins after midnight. So it was Tumblr. It was Google. It was sort of that sort of milieu. Did you interview a lot of fangirls?
I also did, yeah. So basically, I started online, and then I was like, oh my gosh. It felt like discovering a sovereign nation run entirely by 13-year-old girls.
Yep.
And that's not, and it's so important to clarify. What I go on to learn is that, like, fan culture is not just 13-year-old girls. It's people from all walks of life, and it's not just women.
Yep.
But this was my early, naive assumption. And at this moment, I just had, like, a kind of morbid curiosity. You know, I heard that conversation, and I was struck by the violence of her language, and I wanted to know more.
And
go ahead.
Sorry, no. Is that something that you've noticed is sort of when you talk about the violence of her language? I'm sure men are just as obsessive as women. and I'm sure perhaps it's just manifests in different ways. Um, do you think that as a society, when we talk about the obsession of men, we treat it pretty differently?
Well, yeah, I think there's so much to unpack in there. So I think that yeah, we what I went on to figure out is that I think the way that we describe enthusiasm when it is expressed by women or in feminine contexts is slightly but catastrophically different than how we describe male
Sure.
enthusiasm. So like the way that I came upon that realization was that I was researching these fangirls, and then a couple of months in, a guy named Zayn Malik left the band God Direction, causing a global crisis. So all of these girls I started following, girls and boys, who had started following online. I just watched the internet catch a light with feels and the explosive emotions of these young people who were grieving the loss of this person who they loved and who left the band. It was very dramatic. It was like overnight, without warning or explanation. So I was following that, and then I followed the reaction to the fandom grieving, and I watched as mainstream news outlets described like these young banshees and these psychos, and described the emotional reaction to Zayn's departure as inherently a little bit crazy and a little bit too much, and even using words like scary. And that's when I had the epiphany, which led me to, 5 years later, talk at TEDx. And I realized, why is it that a group of young women screaming their lungs out at a pop concert, that image we read as scary, a bit much, psycho, insane, hysterical. But the image of young men screaming their lungs out at a football match or even crying is passionate. That's normal. That's the love of the game. And I was shocked that I had never seen that double standard before. And I was immediately struck that the reason I'd become interested in fangirls was, as I say, that morbid curiosity. And I was like, wait, I'm a woman. At what point did I integrate the belief that women are kind of designed naturally a bit crazier than men?
I see. Wow, there's a lot to unpack in that.
Oh yeah, girl.
Okay, so let's take a step back. Have you always tell me about your journey? How did you come to become an artist? I mean, to become an artist or to become a playwright, to become somebody who's so passionate about sharing their ideas that are in their head and putting them down in some medium to convey them to the world. How did you start your obsession?
Oh, no one ever asks me that. Well, look, I think it all stems from being an only child.
Yep.
And just having to entertain myself all the time. I should say I have a brother from another mother, but he's 13 years older. So I was sort of like, I grew up as an only child. So it probably starts there. And then I can remember when I was a teenager, I discovered theatre, and I was just obsessed with it. Like when you get a crush on someone and you put your phone in your pocket and you just want it to buzz all day. Like I just couldn't stop thinking about theatre, obsessed with it. Also inherently frustrated that I would see shows, and I'd often be the youngest person in the room, and I would look around and I would see a bunch of rich, old, crusty white people, and I was like, man, theatre is about connecting with experiences you've never had, but I kind of feel like I'm in a room with a bunch of people who are quite similar to each other. And so, and another thing that I had a big bugbear was when I was a teenager, I wanted to see theatre all the time, but it's so expensive. So I started finding these sneaky ways to get free tickets. So I would write to education departments of theatre companies and come up with various reasons why I should have free tickets, and then ended up joining some youth advisory panels. I've got like air quotes because it's such a grand term, right?
Yeah.
And various different companies. They were great, actually. There were these little groups of enthusiastic teenagers who would tell the companies how to make their spaces more accessible and welcoming to young people, and would report on what young people wanted. But all of this said, I would go again and again to the theatre, and I think to myself, man, like this is a night out that is so hard to pitch to like other 15-year-old girls I've met.
Sure.
Because for this, like a theatre ticket, let's say it's $50. For the same amount of money, you can go to a gig at the Metro Theatre, and like going to a concert is such a better bargain because it's an adrenaline-filled night. you get dressed up, a stranger's gonna sweat on you in the mosh pit, maybe you're gonna patch someone. There's like the whole event has to do. It's a whole event of an evening that's inherently emotional and thrilling. And the thing about theatre is like often plays are really long and your bum gets tired and like you can't pee and you have to turn your phone off and the Maltesers cost $8 and I just sort of was like, man, when I grow up, I want to make theatre that is as adrenal as a gig and as inclusive as a not piece of theatre. So I think what drove my obsession was wanting to make what I hadn't seen yet.
That is awesome. I'm a massive theatre goer, and I think that one of the things that I realized fairly early on is everything you've said is completely valid. I've enjoyed theatre probably when I was a little bit older than you got into it, but I always thought like, man, this is kind of a downer. Like, why do I have to sit here and there's so much dialogue? And that's why I became obsessed with musicals. I love musicals. I think they're the best, and the best musical that I've ever seen is Legally Blonde.
What?
Have you seen Legally Blonde?
I've literally done an hour-long podcast, which is just me talking to someone about how that is the most underrated musical of all time. I'm obsessed with it. That was my gateway drug.
Oh, I think that Whipped into Shape is probably one of the best showstopper numbers that I've ever seen.
I think this podcast is about to go off the rails.
That's right. And underrated means good.
It means
good. It means very good. It's if you haven't seen it, I mean, I think that up until the Disney Aladdin type musicals have just been great. Like they've totally brought a new generation to what is already an amazing sort of zeitgeist. But I think that I remember seeing Legally Blonde the musical, and I was like, this is epic. This is one of the best things I've ever seen. I was getting goosebumps and chills. It was funny. It was like lighthearted.
I completely agree. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, like Legally Blonde, maybe you've seen the film and you're like, what? That's just a pink film about a girl in heels.
Mm-mm.
But what is incredible about the musical is it is so self-aware that as a writer, I continue to be impressed by how economic the lyrics are. Like the rhymes in that show are tight. So you're watching it and the whole way through, even though it's a bunch of girls who are repeatedly saying, oh my God, they're doing it in this incredible meter with this impressive rhyme scheme, and the work isn't without problems. It's like a super white work in a lot of its stagings, but it's really exciting in terms of what I would describe it as is one of my favorite metaphors. I think it's a really excellent Trojan horse.
Yep.
It appears to be one thing, but it actually smuggles inside of it something much richer. So it feels like a really fun night out, but then you have all these epiphanies about what young women are taught to value and who Elle Woods never knew she could be.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly right. And the path that she's expected to go versus what she ends up doing, and the way she does it in her own way. It's a really impressive piece of art.
It's a bomb.
It's a bomb. It's amazing. Okay, so you wanted to kind of capture that sort of feel in that, but how has the zeitgeist assisted you? Do you think that, as a society, we've moved forward in such a way that now is the time for these kinds of stories?
Well, I feel like we should bridge the gap and explain that. So, like I mentioned, 4 years ago, I became obsessed with fangirls. Then I had this epiphany about the fact that the way that the world talks about fangirls is kind of a microcosm for how the world talks about young female enthusiasm. And I was like, whoa, I really want to talk about that. And I realized, at the time, I was mainly a playwright. I was like, okay, so how would I write a play about that? And I was like, no. This would not be a play. This would have to be, if I was doing a show about fangirls, it has to be a musical. And it has to feel like the best pop concert you've ever been to, like Beyonce ×2. And I also realized that what had attracted me to this concept was the devotion and the worship that I encountered, like the tenacity of that. I was like, man, imagine if it was like a pop concert, but a little bit scary, like a dirty rave, which is how people perceive fangirls, is like scary and out of control, but it also had a girls' choir in it and sounded like you were in the church of Harry Styles. So this was my initial vision, and then fast forward 4 years of hard work, it's come together, and it's coming out in Sydney in October, and it's going to open in Brisbane first in September. So that's what Jahan's generously referring to as this musical I've made. And so in answer to your question, think the time is now. When I started writing this, it was pre-Me Too. It was pre a lot of like awakenings for myself, and it's been really exciting to watch how conversations have changed, and this idea is no longer as radical maybe as when I started.
Yep.
People aren't like, whoa, I guess we do talk to young women differently. People are a little bit better primed for that conversation now in a way that is so exciting.
Yeah. And what do you? I mean, I want to take a step back with that. How much of yourself do you see in the characters that you've created? I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I'm very. For those who don't know, it kicks off in Sydney October 12th, and has a run through the middle of November.
Yeah,
And
at Belvoir Street Theatre in Surrey Hills.
and I'm going to be grabbing some tickets, and I'll be giving you guys a bit of a shout out about how it is, very honestly and forthrightly. But knowing Eve, I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
Thank you.
How much of yourself do you see in these characters, in their story? How much of yourself, you can't write what you don't know. So obviously there must be an element of you in them. But to what extent do you separate yourself from the characters that you created?
That's a good question. Well, for this work, I ended up interviewing like over 100 fangirls and fan dads and people who were fangirls, new fangirls, like fan boys, fan men. So a lot of these characters, most of what you'll see in the show is something that someone said to me or that I've heard. It's inspired by an experience I wanted to represent. But having said that, so the musical itself follows a fictionalized storyline with blockbuster life or death stakes, and it follows this 14-year-old girl who has this problem, which is that she's ruthlessly smart. Her name is Emma, and she's on a scholarship at a rich school where she really shouldn't fit in because she and her mum have no money. But she's got these two best friends that she's found despite it all. And at the kickoff of the show, we learn that she's in love with Harry, who's in the world's biggest boy band, True Connection. We learned that, thank you for smiling. We learned that she is an incredible writer of fan fiction.
Yep.
A gifted author. But we also learned that her two best friends have kind of just recently decided, hey, it's time to grow up. Like, how do I summarize that? There's a big conversation where the pit is like, you're too immature and it's unrealistic for you to think you're actually going to be with Harry. That's ridiculous. If you're 15, it's time to move on. So yeah, the show is kind of about being 14 and being trapped in this pretzel of like, who do I be? I don't want to say goodbye to my childhood, but becoming a woman is terrifying because the whole world is suddenly going, well, this is my personal experience now. Like, for me, to become an adult woman was to have the world tell me, hey, you're about to unlock this superpower you get because you're a girl and it's called hotness, but you have to figure out how to harness it. And so let's just assess everything about you. Like, are you sure those are the eyebrows you want? Should you buy some stuff to get the right eyebrows? This is the right eyebrows. No, wait, this is the right eyebrows. Wait, actually, you should change your hair. No, wait, you need lip gloss. No, you need matte lipstick. And just constantly trying to figure out how to calibrate who I was to be seen in the right way, but you also didn't want to be too hot and not hot enough. And all of this is to say, becoming an adult woman felt like being handed a list of things that I suddenly needed to change or maintain about myself in order to harness my true value, which was how I appeared. And that's a massive theme in this work. And also, suddenly starting to adjust how I presented myself based on how I wanted people to see me. And there's some fascinating research I found when I was doing the show. I mentioned this in my talk as well. There is this voice coach I met named Amy Hume. Shout out to Amy. And she told me that the female voice between the ages of 11 to 13 is one of the most interesting things you can study, in her opinion. Because there's this research by Carol Gilligan that states that is the age when women begin to perform their voices. So they did this study, and girls would start to, for example, introduce breath for apathy, or
yes.
breath for I don't know, to seem more mature. That's right. Or vocal fry for apathy, like if they didn't care about something. But in the same study, like, guess what age men began to perform their voices?
Was it substantially older?
Well, I thought so. I was like, men mature later, right? But actually, the study found that boys began to perform their voices as young as 4 because that's when we tell boys don't scream, don't cry. Those are feminine sounds.
I understand.
Right. So that blew my mind, but also confirmed this theory I had, which is that being 14, that cuspy teenage age, is such an interesting time when young women are trying to figure out who to be in the world, and it was the perfect age for me to consider, for me to tell this story. And so I've just spent the last 5 years remembering how it felt to be 14, and the main memory for me is just having the leakiest armpits, and no matter how much roll-on deodorant I put, just still Slimetown, USA.
It is one of the most difficult times because society is telling you one thing, your body's telling you another. It's you couldn't make me go through puberty
How
again.
was 14 for you? Tell us about it.
Oh my god, I mean, I think I don't remember it because it was probably so traumatic. I've kind of excised it from my brain.
Like childbirth, it just like
absolutely. It's yeah, exactly right. You look at this story of your life, and in that part, it's just vanished. But I do recall being just so confused all the time about everything. And this idea, I mean, I did a bit of studying for my TED Talk where I talked to a vocal coach, and we learned about this concept called prosody, which is the tonality of words and how they sound. So, if you want something to sound like a question, you go up, how are you? And apparently it's much, much more difficult for men to develop prosody later in life because we have spent so many years developing this, I guess, performance of you basically internalize that you don't make certain sounds. You don't shriek, you don't whinge, you don't whine. Yeah, and it was really interesting talking to this coach. Shout out to Michael, who was my vocal coach. Good guy. And now that you say it, I mean, it really does kind of resonate with me, and it kind of goes, wow, what are the messages we're sending? How do you think that as a society we can send a healthier message to young men and women about the things that they love? Even if we as adults think they're, somewhat convoluted or confused or maybe even asinine, how do we send the message that it's okay to like what you like?
Well, I think my big thing when I realized the double standard between how we speak about young female enthusiasm and male enthusiasm is I thought, okay, well, what we need to all reflect on is the different language that we use to describe enthusiasm based on who it's coming from. So, firstly, I think, there's 2 ways we need to look at this. One, I think we need to let young men scream a bit more, express themselves more. We need to not shame that behavior, but then the way to do that is to not use negative words when we're describing behavior behavior like that, like screaming your lungs out or shrieking, and not describing that with negative words that condemn it for being a female. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I feel like that's where the interlinking is happening. And a really great example of just how sinister this language secretly can be is the word hysterical. Now, lots of people know this. I did not when I started researching it, but I would look at images of fangirls and I'd see them screaming, and the first word that came to my mind was hysterical. And I did not know the history of that word, which is that in the 19th century, hysteria was considered this legitimate female mental disorder that could be diagnosed if a woman exhibited difficult behavior or excessive emotion. And the word hysterical comes from a Latin word hystericus, meaning of the womb, because it was thought that this craziness was caused by a dysfunction of the uterus. So one treatment for hysteria was doctors would remove wombs from women. And that's still what we call a removal of the womb, right?
A hysterectomy. Yeah.
Right. So then suddenly I'm like, whoa, that word suddenly it feels so sinister because we don't really describe men as acting hysterically. Very rarely. We'd be much quicker to use that to describe young women. And it is a negative word, right? It sounds like someone's out of control. And the definition of crazy is unreasonable, being without reason. And I think when we casually use a word like crazy, and sometimes we use it interchangeably with amazing. Oh my god, that's crazy! But crazy, if that means without reason, then if we're describing female actions as crazy, then we're saying that that's without reason. And I think that that's not too far away from saying these women are without rationality or they are incapable of rational thought. And I think that that is a very it's a very subtle message that we send to young women, but I'm concerned that over time, the accumulation of having the world constantly choose words like crazy and insane and hysterical to describe your expression can lead young women to kind of form this idea that, yeah, they've just been designed crazier than their brothers. And what does that do to what young women believe that they're capable of? What does that do to the shape of their identity?
Absolutely, absolutely. How do we manifest that as a society? That's a really good point. And it's funny because after I watched your TED Talk, I realized, because I have younger brothers and sisters, and I realized the way that the behavior that if my young brother exhibited, I would be chastising off, versus if my younger sister did it, I would not be, was...
What's an example?
Oh, it's a really good question. I mean, for example, if my brother shrieked and carried on, I would, I'd say that's not acceptable. That's not manly. Don't do that. Whereas if my younger sister shrieked and carried on about something she was passionate about, and then I realized, why are you even using a word like shriek? What is going on? They're both simply being excited. They're excited. My brother wanted to see Hilltop Hoods. He was, excited about seeing them. My younger sister was excited about seeing. I think it was, what was it? It was something that in my mind, I wrote off because, you do that condescending older brother thing where how could anything that the young generation like be absolutely, the kids are crazy. But, and I remember I caught myself and I was like, okay, this is exactly what Eve was talking about in her speech. And I think you're right. It is far more pervasive than we give it credit for. It is absolutely this undercurrent of what we say and don't say. And more concerning is what we don't say. What we tell people they are allowed to feel. Because feelings are going to come out one way or another. They're going to manifest in a pretty... If you tell people to deny the way they feel over time, I know this in my work in the criminal law, it's going to manifest in some way, probably in a really bad way. It's much better to address those issues vocally and verbally. What do you think about, and this was a question I was eager to ask you, what do you think about this new societal trend where we kind of tell everyone they can be anything, do anything? That's true, but there's also a very high chance that most people who want something won't get it, and they can go for it. And I mean, as a society, I think we're doing it wrong, but we're trying to be kind. We're trying to tell this, for example, Edna, we're trying to tell Edna's character, I don't think her friends are setting out to disappoint her or hurt her. They just don't want her to be hurt when she doesn't achieve what she wants. What do you say about that message that society sends that, maybe you should temper your expectations a little bit. Just because Jeff Bezos could start Amazon doesn't mean you can.
Wait a second, what's the question? Is the question, what do I think about society saying you can do anything, or society saying you may not be able to?
What say you, well, let me say, what say you, young squire, on the concept of the new societal trend towards anyone can be anything? Do you think it's positive or negative? And if so, why?
I mean, what a question. I think that this is the inherent millennial conundrum, right? If we all just think we can do anything, maybe we won't. An anecdote that's coming to mind is I spent 3 years living in London, and at the time I was making these one-woman shows where I would interview heaps and heaps of people, and then I would take what they had shared with me and compile it all into a show. And I also had a website where people could anonymously write to me with submissions. So each show had a different premise. One of them was, please describe to me, who do you feel you used to be?
Oh, wow.
Well, thank you. It was a very open-ended question. Sometimes people would answer it jovially, and sometimes with like ruthlessly heartbreaking answers. And I sat down with this 83-year-old woman, and I asked her the question, and she was just so puzzled by it. She's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "So, tell me about like former versions of yourself, like cast your mind back." And she was like, she stopped me in my tracks. She's like, "So you just interviewing a bunch of people and asking them to talk about themselves?" And I was like, "Yes." She was like, "And just tell you who I was and just how I felt." And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm asking you." And she's like, "I don't know how I felt. There was a war on. I was stoked to have a job. Like, do you have any other questions? There was just this, she was utterly uninterested in reflecting on the story of her and her journey. Do you know what I mean? And what she'd been through. And I was so taken by that, like how egoless she was. And I thought, wow, what are we missing a trick?
Yeah, well,
So maybe that's my answer.
that's a really good answer because I've seen that in the older generation, the sort of, well, we just got on with it, stiff upper lip, and we completely ignored our inner emotional life because we were busy getting on with the external needs that had to happen. We had to have food on the table, we had to work, we didn't like the job, or we liked the job was irrelevant, and we just got on with it. That was sort of what we did. And I work with a lot of millennials. I'm just outside of the millennial generation, but it's a very different zeitgeist. It's a really much more exploring the concept of self and am I the best version of me that I can be?
Yeah, constantly optimizing. You know what I will say though, and I think this is really important, is of course, this woman I spoke with, obviously she's lived her life inside a pretty dense patriarchy, right?
Yep.
And something I'm really obsessed with in terms of researching fangirls is, as I mentioned, I had my first opinion of fangirls, and my opinion now of fangirls is that they have a superpower because they know how to do something none of my adult friends know how to do, and that is love something without fear or apology. And so I just think while we're talking about this, it's interesting that you described, older generations, there wasn't a focus on the inner emotional life. And I think that now, even though they can be toxic, symptoms of being self-obsessed with how you feel all the time, or optimization. I mean, I'm speaking in really broad brushstrokes, right? But one thing that I think would be really exciting is if we didn't shame fangirl expression, and we revered it. We revered it for like the miraculousness of it, of someone going, I love that, and I'm going to scream my lungs out about it. Like that's spectacular, and as I mentioned from that research, that's a sound that young women can make because they haven't forgotten how to make it. And so I felt it was important to caveat that.
Well, I think that you've been very fair. All right, I think you've been very honest in regards to how you've described these challenges and this realization. It's not so much, I think, about what one person does. It's what are these trends that we're seeing, and what are these sort of stories that we're hearing, and what do those stories tell us?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to now talk more about you and a little bit less about your work.
Oh, really?
Yes. When you set out to be a playwright, and I'm talking now to younger you, who was who was on the start of the journey, what do you wish you had known that would have really helped you now?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Wow. Like I think I had this concept of what writing was that was probably like really romantic. It's like when inspiration strikes, you'll sit down and like, the idea will carry you away. And it's amazing how much writing really is just showing up every day and
Yep.
doing it even when you don't feel like it. Especially because like you're never going to write one draft of anything. You're going to write a million. I think I'm in the hundreds with my drafts of fangirls. I think it's been 5 years, so that makes sense. And frequently I will get asked to rewrite things. And I'm like, really? We've done this. But it's a job. It's truly a job. And I think the more I have to rewrite the show, the less precious that I get about how sacred writing should be. Because it's like, no, writing is often not even convenient. It's like you've just got to go home this afternoon and get this thing done. And yeah, I wish I had known that like there are no excuses for not getting started. There is no perfect time to start because if you only wrote at perfect times, you would never write.
Absolutely. No, it's amazing that you say that because I've got other friends who are in the writing game and they tell me that. And it blows my mind that the publishing houses have entire floors of people whose job it is to edit and fix and maintain. I don't know how they don't go crazy. It would be the hardest job. Just editing other people's works, finding flaws, finding errors, rewriting sentences, trying to capture the theme and the voice.
That's so funny because I fantasize about that sometimes. I'm like, what if someone else did the grunt work, and I just said, yeah, that bit's good and that bit's not good.
Well, I mean, it's if you do that though, you lose the voice. You lose your voice that's in that story. So it's a little bit of A and a little bit of B. And going forward with that, do you do any visualization? Do you when you set yourself out to complete a task? So did you envisage fangirls in one form or another when you started it? And how different is it to what you've achieved now? How did the day-to-day sort of build to that goal?
Oh my gosh, I love that question because yes, I totally visualized fangirls when I started. It started off as this kernel of an idea. I described like what I wanted it to sound like. But when I came up with this idea, I was like, okay, whoa, here are my obstacles. An original musical written by an Australian, like they cost, if I wanted it how I could see it, they cost millions. I thought there's no chance that this is ever going to really happen. So I gave myself permission to imagine grandly because I truly saw it like a piece of fan fiction in my mind. It was a dream, and then I was very lucky to get a grant to work on it for a year. And even when I did that, I was like, this is a grant to write this work, but it may never see the light of day. And so then I decided to treat it like an MA, a year of intense study where I would learn, but I wouldn't necessarily get a show. And then incredibly, I did a showcase at the end of 2016 that year. And then all these investors came on board and interest in the screenwrites happened. And so I began to realize, like, maybe I'm actually going to see part of these dreams in fidelity. Like, maybe this is going to come to life. And then what is insane now is that, so it's going on, like I say, at Queensland Theatre and Belvoir, but it's also a co-production with Brisbane Festival and the Australian Theatre for Young People. So that is like a four-way power collaboration. And the combined powers of these companies and our incredible director, Paige Rattray, means that we've got like the A-team of Australian Theatre on the show. It's insane. We announced it on Thursday, so I've got to keep my lips zipped, but our choreographer is my fantasy number one, way out of our league choreographer. Like our lighting designer, our designer, all of them. The designs that I'm seeing, it's chilling. It's like images from Pinterest boards that I made 5 years ago of like a Beyonce concert. And like, great, so we're just gonna have this on stage. I'm so excited. And also, our cast, like we spent 7 months casting the show and we saw over 400 people. And they're freaks. We have cast a bunch of insanely talented fetuses. They're so young. They're so talented. I can't even I'm also in the show, and I won't hold a candle to them. I can't believe I get the best seat in the house every night to what's going to be my favorite thing I've ever seen. It's so good.
I have no doubt. I have absolutely no doubt. How does it feel to kind of feed the next generation? And you've blazed a trail. How does that feel? How does it feel to? I can't think of any piece of art, and I spend a lot of my time looking at art, going to concerts, going to gigs, anything like this produced by an Australian in the last few years. I did some research and tried to find it. How does it feel to have knocked down that barrier?
Oh, I haven't done it yet, mate. I don't know. I mean, well, it's funny that part of me is like, whoa, this could be so exciting when this happens. I get very excited about the best possible reaction, but also it's so natural, right? Before something's come out, for then your brain to do a pendulum.
Of course.
What if I only get 1 star? Oh my god. So I guess I'm trying to not focus on that at the moment, and I'm just focusing on if no matter what people say and no matter what the response is, I know that I've made what I wanted to make. I know that when I share this work with young women, they tell me what I always dreamed I would get to hear from them, which is like, oh, this is my life. Thank you. I didn't know, like, I haven't seen anything like this. So, yeah, all I'm focused on really is like doing it for the kids and also like how excited I am to see this incredible cast flourish. Like I said, it's being announced on Thursday, the cast, so I can't mention them, but a lot of them are really young and insanely talented. And I don't say this hyperbolically, but I really feel like in 10 years' time, I'll be like claiming that I once worked with these guys. It's insane.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, let's take some legal advice from me. If the cast is being announced on Thursday, I would be buying my tickets on Wednesday because that's how things happen.
Also, okay, so this is sneaky. I can't say too much, but I was mentioning to you that we do have this one cast member who we're going to announce on Thursday who may or may not have their own fandom. And so if you want to see the show and you want a good seat, I think genuinely do book before Thursday, because I don't know, like we have no idea what's going to happen to our sales when that news is announced.
It'll go up.
I'm excited. If you're just listening, I'm sort of all gnarled like a little cashew with excitement and joy, like a ginger.
A little ginger
A
cashew.
little ginger. Yeah.
Going forward, what's next on the horizon? I mean, it must be, obviously you're going to do this, you're going to nail this, it's going to be great. But what's next?
I'm working on a bunch of different things. So I have sold the streaming rights to Fangirls to adapt it into a TV show, or like a series, I should say. A TV show is an outdated term, with an amazing company in London called Kalantar Films. So that will be the next priority.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Huzzah! Yes.
But also, I'm under commission to write a screenplay for an amazing company called Aquarius Films, which is set in 1995, totally different. I'm co-writing it with my best friend, Thomas Wilson White. And oh gosh, I've got like a podcast musical in the works.
Sorry, what's a podcast? Whoa. What is a podcast musical?
It's a musical that is delivered as a podcast over multiple episodes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, girl. Correct.
That's awesome.
Correct.
You see, I'm always late to the party. Podcasts were kind of, they started in 2011. I'm like, oh, it's a trend. And now, come decade later, I finally got my own. But that's a really great idea.
Thank you. I'm really, really excited about that one.
What do you think about this new? I mean, it's obvious that you're using technology to kind of connect with the medium of writing in a way that's kind of new. I mean, podcast musical, for example, is a fantastic one. How do you see the sort of technological rise helping create ideas that would have otherwise been trapped only in your brain?
Well, the way I want to answer that question is a little bit adjacent to or parallel to it. What I'm really excited about is that I fell in love with musicals when I was 15 because one of my best mates at the time was obsessed with them, and a condition of us staying friends is that I became obsessed with them. And so reluctantly, I listened to cast albums, and slowly I got the bug. And I had a lot of bugbears initially about musical theatre. I sort of thought, oh no, it's going to be really like white and hetero, and it's just going to be really narrow, and all the women are going to be written badly. But then I found all these exceptions to the rule, and I was like, no, this is dope. And I loved it because it was like being able to go to the theatre by just putting my headphones in. Everywhere I go, I could listen to it on my iPod, and that was so special to me. A way to connect with theatre without having to spend $50 on a ticket. And it's been so exciting to watch how in recent years, musicals in the States, most notably Hamilton, have got these incredible global fan bases of, say, like teenagers in Norway who've never seen the show live, but who have sat with that album and sat with the digital footprint of that show, the clips online, the pictures, and they have gotten an incredible amount of enjoyment out of that work, and then created fan art off the back of that, and they've entered online communities, and they've had this experience of being an audience member, and being an audience member without ever stepping into a theatre. And that is why I'm really excited about the potential of podcast musicals, because I think it's an incredible way to get theatre to the people. It's infinitely distributable, infinitely scalable, and it's less discriminatory in terms of who can access it. You don't have to be in the right city, and you don't have to be the right amount of train journey away from the theatre, which theatres are usually in affluent areas, and you don't have to be able to afford an expensive overpriced ticket.
It's crazy because I've wanted to see Hamilton since it came out, and I, with respectfully as many resources as you could muster, can't get a ticket.
No.
So it's so unfair for the young person who's passionate and hungry and wants to see it to not be able to access it, and it's from what I hear, it's a heck of a musical. I've deliberately avoided listening to the cast album. I won't listen. I don't until I see it.
I love that.
And then after I see it, I listen to it obsessively.
With that show either, so I'm really impressed by that.
Well, it's hard. I'll admit it's super duper hard, but I think I think that you've got to do that because it colors it. I did the same with Book of Mormon. It took me years to see it, but when I finally saw it, just what are the three things? And we're slowly coming to the end, but what are the three things about fangirls and obsession that you want to leave the viewers with? Where are the well, you've already explained this, but where would I start if I wanted to learn more about fangirls, and why should I learn more about fangirls?
Where would you? Okay.
So Google.
Google. Okay. Why should you learn more about fangirls? I believe that looking at fangirls and the way the world gazes at fangirls is a microcosm for how the world looks at young women at all. And so that is why I think people should like lean in and listen up when it comes to fangirls and how they're treated. I'm going to answer your question about three things that I want people to know. So I could give like 3 zany facts about fangirls, but instead I've kind of got like 3 steps that I want people to go through when they see like a pack of young girls screaming their lungs out, or they see like a news story about how crazy that is. So I feel like step 1 is like review the language. Would the same words be used if it was a group of young men? And just try swapping out those words and see if your emotional response and assumptions about the story are altered. Step 2, I think reflect on the group of people who are being described, and maybe it's a group of young girls, or maybe it's a group of like young gay men at a Britney Spears concert. Like, let's look at feminine contexts. I'm using these words super loosely.
Sure.
So I think the next thing is to ask yourself about the stories that group of people have been told in their lives, and what this expression might mean to them in their contexts. So like, for example, when I realized that, being a teenage girl for me was just constantly being anxious and not knowing who to be in the world, giving me a lot of conflicting information, I saw fangirls screaming their lungs out, and I was like, man, this is a moment of sweet freedom for you in a world that is constantly telling you you're not good enough. And I suddenly was like, oh, this is cool. I'm cheering for you cheering. I no longer see this as like gratuitous and excessive. And then finally, what's my final point? Oh yeah, think about something that you love that much and how it would feel to express yourself in that way. And I think a lot of people would say, oh, it would feel embarrassing and it would feel scary. So that's just another reason to be so impressed by it and to revere fangirls for screaming their lungs out and expressing themselves.
No, that's absolutely right. I love that, and I think that we need to challenge these prejudices because they exist and they exist in our language. It's if the idea of the fangirl is too far removed, look at some poor people during Hurricane Katrina. It was evident when it was a certain demographic, they were looting, and it was a certain other demographic, they were looking for food. Same behavior, 2 completely different ways of describing it. And I think that if we can challenge those assumptions with something that is happening in our everyday world, somebody can see that these are passionate, intelligent, smart, strong young ladies who are just kind of conveying what they feel inside, I think that's awesome.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also worth saying that like other assumptions that I had about fan culture was that it was super heterosexual, and that also it was very like competitive and maybe aggressive, and it was girl versus girl. And those assumptions were dispelled time and time again as I discovered online fandom and discovered I just am obsessed with telling the story. There is this group in London called the Rainbow H Project of Harry Styles fans. And last year at a Harry Styles concert, 2 girls decided to do a project where they dropped on 14,000 seats at the O2 Arena tiny little notes. And the note said, please hold this up to your phone flashlight during, I think it was Sweet Creature, one of his songs, to be part of a rainbow. And stapled to that was a coloured piece of paper. And sure enough, when he sang that song, everyone did this, and the entire stadium lit up as a rainbow flag. And there's another fan alliance called Rainbow Direction from the One Direction fandom that are all about creating safe spaces for queer fans at concerts. And I think they actually started doing rainbows in the States through a different method years earlier. And it's stuff like that. We're like, man, isn't it wild that some of the assumptions about fangirls are that they're crazy and out of control and overwhelmed by their emotions? Because these are examples of like executive leadership skills, communication skills, logistical skills, and it's near militaristic. And it's
Absolutely.
all community driven. It's about coming together as opposed to tearing each other apart. And for me, it's vitamins. It's so nutritious and delicious.
Everybody, this was episode 10 of Concepts with Kalantar with my friend Eve Blake, and make sure that you
Yay!
keep your eyes on the prize, and that her musical, which is coming out to
It's
Belleville.
called Fangirls. The musical is called Fangirls. Yes, sorry. Just
No,
important to know,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely. I'll be giving it a shout out a little bit later once I see it, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Come see the show at Queensland Theatre or Belvoir.
Bye.